Alrighty, we're going to jump here in a moment. We're going to pick up in our discussion of the anthropological argument. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But so far in the aspect of evidences for the existence of God, we've talked about revelation, and that has to do with that which is revealed both through nature and then, of course, by special revelation, that which we have written in the Word of God. We talked about some classical proofs, and that was on page 3 of lesson number 2, kind of an overview of some of the things that we are looking at. The cosmological argument, basically, it is the idea that the universe is here, and therefore there must be some explanation for it. And thinking about the law of cause and effect, how did it get to be here? And so there was some discussion there within that. And then we went into lesson number 3, we talked about the teleological argument there, which it says essentially if the universe evinces purposeful design. In other words, if you look at the universe and see evidence for purposeful design, then there must have been a designer. And you look at our universe, yes, there's evidence of order, there's evidence of design, therefore there must have been some level of designer to that. And so where we're starting tonight addresses what some would call the anthropological argument or the moral argument. And what we have here when we look at this is it is the idea that within man himself there is a moral nature. That is to say, when you compare us to the animals, there is something that exists within us that does not exist within the animals. That the sheer fact, if you set aside God for just a moment, the sheer fact that mankind figures out we need to write laws, we need to have some sort of governing structure. There are certain things that are wrong, certain things that are considered right. Within the animal world, you don't see this level of reasoning. And so you look in mankind himself, and there's the evidence here of this moral nature. All people having a sense of what ought to be done in certain circumstances, maybe a sense of fair play, you might say. And I realize that some of this, what we're talking about, could be nurture. All right, people respond the way that they have been raised, but there are many times people will go against their raising, either for the good or for the worse. But it's a decision that they are able to make. They're able to cross that line, going from wrong into right or right into wrong. C.S. Lewis, let's see, they've got the... no, we won't bring in the C.S. Lewis. Is that on the next chart yet, Kelvin? Oh, I can? Oh, that's handy. We're doing the charts a bit differently tonight. Thank you. No, it's not. You'll notice there in the lesson that C.S. Lewis called it the law of human nature. So far as creatures of the earth are concerned, morality is uniquely a human trait, and as even unbelievers concede, and that's, of course, what we have been talking about here the last couple of minutes. So since there is the evidence here of this morality and the idea of morality, what's the question? Well, where did it come from? Who gave man this sense, this moral structure? Going from animals, do you think about all the animals of the world? We said a while ago, how did man get to this point? Animals don't operate on a series of ethical codes as man does. So since we have the evidence of it, where did it come from? And so the options are, and you'll see on the screen there, that either there is an external source of eternal goodness, in other words, a standard setter, that being God, okay, establishes what is right and what is wrong, or somehow or another morality evolved naturally in man as a result of inanimate forces. So in other words, at some point, even the animals that are living today in several extended period of time will eventually come to some moral structure. And it's more accurate, or not more accurate, it's more easier to believe that the morality that exists within us is created by God, put there by God. Although the context is a bit different, the Apostle Paul in his letter to the church at Rome, and this is Romans 2, verses 13 through 15, and we'll go ahead and be turning there for just a moment. The Apostle Paul makes an observation regarding the Gentiles. And And let's go ahead and consider that for just a moment there. Yeah. Romans chapter 2, 13 through 15. Look at verse 14 very specifically there. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves. Now, the observation has to do with that statement there. By nature, they did the things that were in the law. Okay? When we think about the Hebrews, we think about God's law that he gave to the children of Israel on Mount Sinai. There was a whole world of people that God did not give a law to. Okay? When you stop and think about, if you research the ancient history of people who live in, think about China and the history there of China, go back, in what their historical record, several thousand years, you're not going to find where God gave them the law like he gave the Israelites. But yet, when you look throughout the whole of the world, mankind has always had, look at all the history we have recorded, there's been laws, there's been structure, there's been things that have been considered right, things that have been considered wrong. And so there is a natural sense wherein the morality is established within us. Now, this isn't necessarily to say that every person, it's not trying to say that we are born knowing right from wrong, but yet, when you look at people who are born without even a religion, there still appears to be within them some morality, some ethics, things that had to come from somewhere within our design and within our creation. Any thoughts or comments so far about this? There is one thought that we went past. I want to back up. In the beginning, in what image did God make man? In his image, yeah. And there's been a lot of discussion through the years as what is meant by that. But if you stop and think about mankind, the morality, the ability to reason, the consciousness, you think about from the spiritual aspect of how man is separate from the animals, we begin to have a better understanding of the image in which God created us. And this all points towards, or to include what we're looking at here. So God has instilled within man the ability to be holy. Think about what Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 16. Peter tells the people there, and the context here is a little bit different, but Peter says, "Be holy, for I am holy." This is God speaking, and he's quoting here. So if there's ability within man to have a moral structure or moral center, then there is the ability within man to live in a fashion that's pleasing unto God. All right, but notice the question there, how does the atheist, let's see, let me jump forward one here. How does the atheist explain the existence of morality there? And this is at the bottom of page 3 in your lessons there. Here's the quote. "He must contend that somehow raw, eternal, inorganic matter was able, by means of an extended evolutionary process, to concoct, promote, and maintain morality. Such a theory is self-defeating for two reasons. First, it wrongly assumes that man, with that evolved mass of cerebral tissue between his ears, somehow is capable of discovering moral truth. Why should he be, and jump forward, since no other animal on the long meandering evolutionary chain can locate and live by moral truth? In other words, why only man? Why not the animals that supposedly have preceded man? Second, it should be clear that raw matter is impotent to evolve any sense of moral consciousness. Thus, if morality is man-authorized, hence man-centered, it is utterly impossible to argue for any singular system of ethics to which one could consistently argue his fellows to subscribe. Who could ever charge correctly that someone else's conduct was wrong, or that a man ought or ought not to do thus or so? In other words, without there being the governing structure that we have within our understanding of us coming into existence via God, without that, there's no source whatsoever for any type of morality in man. Maybe the best that we could hope for is eventually we learn the cause and effect thing, okay? One might argue that at some point man began to realize that if he lived for himself and he was overly selfish, and began to hurt people and take away from people, it was bad for society. I've heard some people try to argue that it's kind of lessons learned and everything. But then again, that still requires some level of guilt, some level of consciousness, some level of just a whole slew of mental faculties that had to evolve if that was the case for even the lessons to be considered. Any thoughts or any comments about this? Okay. And again, keep in mind while we're looking at this, what the point is. We're talking about the evidence of these things. All right. Does man have a moral nature? Yes, it's apparent. Look at all the laws and everything. Look at the history of mankind. So where did it come from? There's the question. The cosmos. You look around the universe. There's order within the universe. From where did it come? You know, you look around, you see the presence of all these things, and the one big question we always have is where did it come from? And you either have one of several options. One of the options says it came from nothingness. The other option says it came from a designer, a creator, an originator. And you have to figure out which one is more reasonable to believe. Even within our own life, think about the life that we live. Is there any type of area within our life where you can see such magnitude of magnificence of something come literally from nothing? Well, what is the biggest concern with, I'll ask Jared this one. Well, what is the biggest concern with AI? Not so much the Hollywood movies and everything, but okay. I will tell you, is the whole concept of artificial intelligence. If you've seen any movies in the last 60 years, you see some sort of depiction of where you have this artificial intelligence that gets to the point of sentientness where it's able to learn and to grow. And, I can't remember. Isaac Asimov was very famous for his 3 rules that robots have to live by. And if you're a geek, you know those 3 rules. Really bad, you're a real bad geek if you know those 3 rules. But one of them has to do with, like, you do no harm to others, but you also do no self-harm, and there was a third one. But here's the point. Okay, everybody's worrying about this. Is it spontaneously going to happen? No, it begins with us beginning to program. And I don't misunderstand me. We're going to get some really smart computers. I don't believe it'll ever get to that point. I really, really don't. But the point is, where's the intelligence behind all this? It's the man that created it. That's us. It takes a lot of intelligence to program, and then to program into a language where the thing is able to learn. If you ever use Google, use any type of search engine, many times you'll find that it is oddly learning from you. The little capture devices, we have to go and click on a series of boxes before you really prove you're an actual human being. Part of that's the learning process. It's really interesting the way it works. Will it ever take over the world? I don't think so. But here's the point. Did it come into existence by itself? No. And that's probably one of the most complicated things that man has developed in the last 100, 150 years. And yet, who has developed it? Man has. So it's hard to believe. It would be like someone saying this artificial intelligence that is working and is so smart and is able to do this and that. Well, you know, one morning we just woke up and it was there. All by itself. Doesn't work that way. The universe has never worked that way. It's a universe that was created with order. And so therefore, bring it back down to the moral structure as well. All right, any thoughts or comments about this? All right, hedonism. There's a couple terminologies here we're going to look at real briefly. And what happens is when you stop and think about this, morality and ethics requires a differentiation between what is right and what is wrong. So then there must be some ultimate standard to distinguish between these. Now the atheists, of course, will claim that there is no such standard. So in an attempt to explain human ethics, they propose various philosophies. Here are 2 of them. Hedonism. It's the doctrine that pleasure or happiness is the sole or chief good in life. Ultimately, when everything is said and done, what matters is whether or not you've been happy, whether or not you've had pleasure. Well, the philosophy is very inconsistent, and here's why. What if one, in the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, must inflict pain upon others in order to achieve the goal? How could that hedonism result in morality, where you end up harming others for your own pleasure? All right, and then and then think about any act of immorality. How is that going to act of immorality produce a morality? And then what is there about hedonism that would motivate a person to forego his own pleasure in the interest of others? You think about that for a moment. If this is true and if this is where our morality comes from, then our morality is askew. Because we should be able to be moral while we are still trying to selfishly pursue our own pleasures. That's hedonism. He goes on a little bit more with that explanation, but let me jump forward because it's pretty straightforward and talk about utilitarianism. Utilitarianism. All right, the useful is the good. So the determining consideration of right conduct should be the usefulness of consequences. Does that make sense to y'all? Kind of hard to wrap the brain around, but you think about it, the useful is the good. The determining consideration of right conduct should be the usefulness of consequences. Remember, I mentioned earlier that there is some level of argument that says that maybe over the course of time, man, through lessons and consequences, might determine, after so many times of getting burned by fire, you learn not to put your hand in fire, might be the argument where that would go. But the aim of action should be the largest possible balance of pleasure over pain, or the greatest happiness of the greatest number. So good is that which gives pleasure to the greatest number of people. Utilitarianism. What is good for the masses is good for the one, and therefore if it results in good for the masses, it must be the moral thing to do. But here's the flaw within the reasoning. If pleasure to the greatest number of people prevents one from achieving his own personal pleasure, what is there to motivate him towards the pleasure of the many? In other words, if I have to give up my pleasure so that everybody else can be happy, why am I even motivated to do for everybody else like that? Because I'm having to suffer and suffer greatly, pulling nothing from it. Second, provides no guideline to determine what the pleasure, genuine happiness, of the many actually is. And the point is, keep in mind, they're using utilitarianism to say this is how we could have morality, but yet there's holes within that. It would prevent the development of this moral structure. And there's a third one. This is a philosophy that stands behind and is perfectly consistent with numerous atrocities perpetrated in the alleged interest of humanity. If I believe it's for the good that 100,000 people die, then, and I get other people to agree with me on it, then it's moral for us to do this. All right, any thoughts or any comments about those two considerations? Okay. The theistic explanation of morality is the one that carries a more logical answer. And we're not going to take the time to look at all this on the chart behind me there. But you think about God. God created the heavens and the earth, but he just didn't create the heavens and the earth, he created man. But he didn't simply create man, he gave man a law. He gave man the ability to understand right and wrong. He gave man the ability to suffer. He gave the man the ability to be happy. He gave man the ability to acknowledge when he has done something that is wrong. We call that, what do we call it when we've done something wrong and it really is bothering us? Consciousness, guilt, remorse, We have the ability to look at our actions and say, I wish I hadn't done that. I regret having done that. And there has to be something within us that has been created within us, the ability to do this, and this is where we bring it back around to God. You see some of the passages there on the screen behind me, but I want you to notice the one in Psalms 119, verse 39 and verse 68. Let's turn over there for just a moment. Psalms 119. And keep in mind, as you're turning there, what we're talking about is trying to figure out something that you will not find any positive answer for. All we're looking for are evidences, and which is more reasonable to believe, one or the other. Look at verse 39 of Psalms 119. We read there that he says, "Turn away my reproach which I dread, for your judgments are good. All right, think about the judgments of God, the commands of God. Within man. Now, does mankind always follow the moral structure? No. One of the biggest challenges we face today, and this is nothing new, when people talk about the whole LGBTQ movement, it is all about individuals wanting to be able to live in a way that goes beyond what has normally been accepted through the years as right and wrong. With one exception, okay, to truly be consistent with this, they need to add one more letter there, and I don't know what it would be, and I'll explain what I mean by this. The whole concept of it is a sexual behavior that is contrary to the normally accepted sexual behavior, okay? So you have that. So the whole thing there is structured out to be. If sex was not involved, none of this would be relevant. The LGBTQ. If this act of sex was not involved, it would not be relevant. Because you would have good friends. You had people that could be around each other and enjoy each other's company and all that. But because it brings in that element, then we begin to cross all these lines. So there's one more we've got to add to it. And they're not going to add to it because this is what they're pushing, and I don't think our culture would let us to do this. But sexual immorality, period. The Hebrew writer says marriage is honorable and the bed undefiled. But whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. So you could have a heterosexual couple, a man and a woman living together out of wedlock, living together in sin, engaging in sexual immorality, and they're no different. They're no different in the sin they're committing than the other ones that were listed. Okay? And that's what it boils down to. They are no different. If you'll remember some years ago, the owner of Chick-fil-A, was the owner of Chick-fil-A? Anyway, he made this bold statement in favor of marriage, one man, one woman type thing, you know. And boy, he got a lot of customers. And don't misunderstand me, I'm not mocking what he said at all. And I admire him for what he was willing to say publicly. It was something we should all be willing to say. But what if he had said, one man, one woman for life, never divorcing, never remarrying? What if that was the position he stood upon? Would he have been received as well as the other one? All right. It's easy for the right, it's easy for the morally minded individuals to say, yes, marriage is one man and one woman, and the relationship should take place in between one man and one woman. But when you have it outside of marriage or you allow unscriptural divorces to come in, it's no different. And the morality of man knows that. Okay? But what happens is when we go to, and this is why I'm saying the LGBTQ movement, it is a lot about the act of sexual immorality. You pull that out of it, it falls flat. I mean, they're just regular people who like other people and they're good friends with other people. And so if we're going to be consistent in the moral structure, we have to be consistent all the way through. Now, I understand some people say, well, it is an atrocity against nature. I understand that. You know, God created one man, one woman. But go all the way back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Mankind has always taken the whole concept of one man for one woman for life, chastity before marriage, no other partners after marriage, and has thrown it out the window. And so we're no different in our culture today. We just add different variations on a theme to it. Okay, that's enough on my part of that rant. Any thoughts or comments about that? Okay. Anyone remind me why I went there? Maybe because, well, God's Word is good. Maybe. And that's what we were fundamentally looking at. He's the one. That's it. If He created us, And this is why we have gone so long holding to this moral structure. It's hard to imagine that without the originator, the creator, if all this came about by somehow matter of evolution, it's hard to imagine that we have been this structured for this long. You know. Okay. All right, let's see. Any other thoughts? Oh, that's kind of the point. This is why theistic explanation is the more logical answer. All right, the lesson goes into some other aspects of this, and we're not going to get into all of them because of time. We'll briefly review the nihilism is traditional values and beliefs are unfounded, and that existence is senseless and useless, denies any objective ground of truth, and especially of moral truth. That sounds like a lot of people's position today, if you stop and think about it. And many times, what do they call someone who's espousing, like we said a while ago, one man, one woman for life, and sexual relationship only after you're married? That's outdated. That's a traditional way of viewing things, and we don't have to be held by those things. This nihilism springs from the atheistic notion that since there is no God, there can be no rational justification for ethical norms. In other words, if God is dead, then what is allowed? Anything you want. Yeah. And there should be no consequence. There should be no guilt. There should be no remorse, etc., etc. Okay. The next one, relativism, is very similar in some ways. Ethical truths depend on the individuals and groups holding them. Okay, ethical truths depend on the individuals and groups holding them. You people in the Church of Christ, you hold to this view about marriage and divorce and remarriage, and this is your moral ethical structure, but you can't expect other groups to hold similar beliefs. And that's kind of the idea here. It is very subjective to whatever group you decide to join. It rejects the idea that there can be universal criteria for determining values. All value systems are thought to be culturally originated and conditioned. All are equally valued. But when you look at the history of man, you see this isn't the case. How many cultures have ended up having essentially the same set of laws? You don't kill, you don't steal, and just so forth and so on. There's got to be a reason for that. Yes, Dan?
Marriage is an institution that God set up. People today want to change God's rules on something that He set up. So their idea is you can have same-sex marriages. If you're going to have anything you call marriage, you have to go by the person that invented marriage. Who set it up? If you want to change the name of it for civil rights, that's another thing. If you want to say my significant other or life partner or whatever, but you can't say we got married. You want to come to our marriage, because that's a word in a institution that God set up. So you have to follow His rules on it. If you say that, say for instance, football, England's football, soccer. If you say anybody out there can touch the ball with their hands, they can carry the ball, then it's no longer soccer. So you can't call it soccer. You have to change the name of it. So that's my problem with it. I can see separation of church and state and having civil laws that protect the rights of individuals, but they want to use God's institution and call it and change the law.
Well, yeah. Go ahead, Cody.
I think it's all basically the same thing as people that follow like denominationalism. It's they have a certain way they want to live their life, and it's not by God's law. So they'll just skip that part, and they're like, I'm not going to change my life for God, but I want to bring God into my life the way it is. And that's exactly what people are doing when they, live their life one way, and they're saying, hey, I'm a Christian, just because I believe.
Yep. So they end up redefining God.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem that I think that is driven, and we'll leave this subject here in just a second real quick. I think, and Dan, this goes back to what you were saying, the problem that has driven the push for the political acceptance of these things has to do with something that I think you pointed towards there. When you bring in an unfairness when it comes to hiring, when it comes to the way that you treat other people. In other words, let's say you have an individual who is living unethically, or not unethically, immorally. Let's go that route. And you say you cannot work a job in this city because you cannot go buy food at the store because I'm not going to rent to you because don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying if you got someone who clearly if you rent to them in 5 days the place is going to be destroyed. There's certain understand about that. But what has happened is throughout our history, anybody that didn't walk by the normal standard, which was considered moral, was treated in a very unfair way. Sometimes. And what has happened is through the course of time, these instances have then blown into larger images, like throwing a picture up on a screen, creating a case that probably had already been overcome. I mean, you think about the equal rights and all that, and think about women. Women for the longest time were really suppressed, and now, bless their hearts, are still not making as much as men in some parts of the world, I guess. But there's already been this push. But what has happened is now they've used it as an excuse to have the whole world or a whole country to accept these things that at one time anyone would have acknowledged, hey, this is against nature. I mean, you look around, set the Bible aside for a moment, set God aside for a moment, and look at the history of mankind. What's the population of the earth roughly now? I don't think they say like 7 billion, something other like that. How did all 7 billion people get here? Majority of them involved a man and a woman. I mean, that's the way the world's been. I mean, and so the whole concept that you can have marriage defined as something different and have, so forth and so on, even goes against the very natural use of what we have. But in relativism basically say, well, guys, you believe what you want to believe. Over here, we're going to believe it differently. And over here, we're going to believe it differently. And you can't bind on us what you believe, and et cetera, et cetera. All right, any thoughts or comments about that? Okay. Jared. Yeah. If you'll rewrite what God expects of us, then it's more palatable, and more people will like it and not take offense at it. Yeah. Situationism, real quick, a couple more. Situation ethics, acts are judged within their context instead of by categorical principles. Situation ethics, do they always work? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There are certain things that are wrong no matter what, certain things that are right no matter what, and the situation, typically this concept of situational ethics does not rewrite what God has already given. Humanist Manifesto 1 and 2, here's what they have within there. We affirm that moral values derive their source from human experience. Ethics is autonomous and situational, needing no theological or ideological sanction. Ethics stems from human needs and interests. To deny this distorts the whole basis of life. Therefore, you could live in one city, and if your firstborn child is blonde-headed and blue eyes, you can kill that child. But you go over to a city down the road, they may hold that, no, you can only do that to a red-headed child with blue eyes. And this next city after that will hold another structure. And so every city, they could, whatever they see, we have too many blonde, blue-eyed people, for the next 100 that are born, we'll wipe them out. We don't like redheads. They get too angry and they cause too many fights. Situationally, it'd be better if we didn't have them. See the flaw with that. Everybody would create their own based on their own situation, and this is what it's talking about here with this. All right, and any thoughts? And then let's move on from this one here. Determinism. Now this one's very interesting. All right, determinism is the acts of the will occurrences in nature or social or psychological phenomenon are casually determined by preceding events or natural laws. In other words, especially hard determinism is the idea that what you're going to do has already been determined that you're going to do it, and there's no accountability for it, there's no guilt, there's no remorse, you're really not responsible. Soft determinism creates a bit of responsibility for what you do. Hard determinism, there's really no responsibility, and you end up blaming it on someone else. And so here's the problem. Instead of looking at the Bible and understanding God as the source of moral structure, what happens is they automatically, let's start an argument, let's start a discussion, and right off the bat, we take God out of it altogether. Now let's talk about how did the world get here, how did the universe get here, why do we have a moral structure, why do we believe in right and wrong, and so forth and so on. And someone says, well, the Bible, no, we've thrown the Bible away. So now we've got to come up with some other explanation for it. And these are some of the attempts that man has tried to justify or to show the existence of a moral structure. Any thoughts or any comments about this so far? Yes, Kyle.
So, a lot of us have experienced and have understand Christ on an emotional level, on a spiritual level. The Holy Spirit, we understand that. And so, this is a lot where we're coming from. We're showing evidence. We're justifying with logical truths, right? When we are going out and talking to people in the world, though, I was watching this video the other day on sales. It's the same thing. And in order to convince people, people buy, which in this case would be buying what you're telling them. People buy with emotion, buy off emotion, and then they justify by logic. So when we're teaching people, these are things we have in our back pocket, but those aren't the first things you're going to talk to them about.
Yeah.
You need to show them the Spirit of God, and that's how they're going to buy into it. They're going to buy with that emotion. They're not going to buy into all these facts. If I go out and try to sell a car off all these features and I don't show them the love and the care and try to show them that emotion there, they're not going to buy into it. They can get that same thing from anybody who doesn't care about them at all. You show them that, and then boom, they're connected, they're bought in, and now they're justifying it. Okay, yeah, now that makes sense. And then they get all these facts together. So I only say that just because I think part of the point to all of this is so we can reach other people, right? So ultimately, we want to do that first, and then a lot of these things will come after.
Well, that's a very good point. Why should someone who doesn't believe in God listen to you when you come up and say, listen, God wants you to do this? You know nothing about them. There's been no investment. They don't even, as far as they know, you're a religious zealot trying to convert them to your numbers. They don't really see you as caring about them. And the more they can see that you have a genuine concern and you're willing to invest the time, then they're more willing to listen to, like what you're talking about. Let's go ahead and figure out where the hurdles are, and some of the things we're looking at may be some good starting points. And then if eventually they see, your belief in God has led you to be this way towards me, maybe I should investigate that further, But if they view you as just finding another religious prospect to mark off a number on your requirements, and there are some religions like that, there's not going to be the same response. Yeah. Dan.
Do that. Because Mark 16, 15, and 16 tells us to preach the gospel to all creatures. And instructing them they need to be that and not just show them our love and our feelings. We have to add to that the gospel.
What Kyle's talking about is the starting point. The end result is to be able to sit down and show them what Jesus Christ did for them and show them the gospel. But sometimes we have to invest. We have to chisel away some problems. That's probably not the best way of wording it. It is stated that, I was thinking Michelangelo and the David illustration, but I'll come back to you. It is supposedly stated that in many sculptures, they look at a block of stone, and you and I would see a block of stone. They see the finished product. So when we're trying to teach someone, we know where we got to get them to, But we've got to figure out how do we get them from point A to point B. And you got to have someone that believes in God and he have a longer and harder road with them because of where they've already grounded in. And so that's kind of the whole concept there is, and there are a lot of studies. There's one called In the Same Hour of the Night, but that's a very unique individual that you can convince in a matter of 3 hours. Most of the time, there's got to be a greater investment. Jared, you were saying.
In earlier years, I would try to share the gospel with someone just right off the hand, but I find that, like Kyle was saying, you need to know the person, and it gives more of an open opportunity with, as far as sharing things in common, and then when the opportunity presents itself.
Yeah.
And then that's always looking for the opportunity whenever it does.
Yeah, this is a very valid point. We're talking about two different types of scenarios altogether. No, but you're right though. You've got the scenario of someone who's married into your family versus the person that you're stuck on the plane with for 3 hours. The conversations you have with them. There may be someone that you only have 3 hours with, and you find that they seem to be interested in religious things. Let's talk. And you have the moment, and so you get to the point faster than you would. But let's say if you sat down by someone who was a professed atheist, you might begin the conversation with, what do you think about there being existence of God? And just find some point to engage them. But if we're talking someone where you'll probably have long-term, a neighbor, someone in your family, that's when you really begin to dig in to the process there. But let's see, good comments on that. The last argument real quick, and this will be in your book, the aesthetical argument. It's the argument which is based on the presence of beauty and sublimity in the universe. Most will agree that there is beauty all around us. What can explain the presence of this phenomenon? Again, come back to the question, what is the cause? You look at the beauty, you look at the structure of nature. Think about the sunset and the colors in the sky. What causes the sun, better yet, what causes the moon when it is initially coming up over the horizon to look huge and kind of orangish at times? That's right. You got the atmosphere, the dust within the atmosphere, the moisture and all this. You think about all the beauty we see with the spider's web. This is not by chance. It's all based on that which has already been created. And so if you find yourself looking at something in nature and finding it utterly beautiful, then ask the question, who made it this way? And you're back to the same question. And so these are evidences of things that are already there that demand the question, where do they come from? And that's why this is kind of important. Next lesson number 4, we're going to step right into it next Wednesday. We're going to be looking at evidences for the Bible as God's Word. So we're shifting gears now. A lot of the supplemental information that's in the back of the books that we passed out, read through some of that. It goes into a lot more detail, and so it makes for great extra reading. And so be sure to do that. But let's look at evidences for the Bible as God's Word next Wednesday night. Appreciate your participation and comments.